The following account was shared by a Korean shaman. Whether you believe it's real or not is entirely up to you. By the time the man entered my shrine, he'd already stopped sleeping. His eyes looked hollow, not tired, not exhausted, empty, as though something had been slowly draining him for years. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes like bruises. For several minutes, he didn't speak. He simply sat there with his head lowered, breathing slowly, waiting. At first, I assumed he was just another troubled visitor, someone dealing with grief, debt, loss. But the moment he sat down, the room changed. The temperature dropped. The incense smoke stopped moving, and something behind him shifted. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Then I realized the shadows were breathing. Dozens of figures stood behind him, completely silent. Not one or two, dozens. Some looked broken, some appeared twisted. Others barely looked human anymore. And every single one of them seemed focused on the same thing: his hands. That's when I noticed the rings. 8 thick gold rings. Almost every finger carried one. Most of them looked expensive, heavy, polished. But one ring looked different, older, worn, as if it had belonged to somebody else long before it belonged to him. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a normal haunting, because the spirits surrounding him didn't seem angry. They seemed patient, as though they'd been waiting a very long time. Eventually, the man spoke. He told me he'd spent nearly 20 years driving a private ambulance. Not an emergency responder, not a hero. Just a man transporting patients between hospitals late at night. Then he told me why he'd come. Lately, every time he closed his eyes, he heard breathing inside the ambulance, even when nobody was there. At first, he tried to explain everything away: stress, insomnia, guilt, anything except the truth. But the spirits behind him told a different story. One by one, they began revealing what had happened inside that ambulance over the past 20 years. An elderly man who lost consciousness during transport, a missing wallet, a family photograph that disappeared before reaching the hospital, a woman whose jewelry vanished after she died during transfer, patients left waiting while their belongings were searched. Tiny delays, only minutes, but inside an ambulance, minutes decide whether people live or die. The man sitting in front of me had spent years treating dying people like abandoned property, and eventually, the dead began following him home. What frightened me most wasn't the stealing. It was how normal it had become to him. He spoke about it without emotion, as though he were describing old parking tickets. He insisted he never killed anyone, but the spirits disagreed. Some blamed his greed, others blamed his delays. Several blamed his complete indifference toward human life. Then I noticed something strange. The spirits weren't fighting each other. Normally, restless spirits bring chaos, noise, screaming, violence. But these spirits stood together in complete silence, as though they understood each other. And then I realized why. Every single one of them had died inside the same ambulance, the same narrow walls, the same fluorescent lights, the same driver. Over time, their resentment had become connected, like passengers trapped on the same journey long after death. And among all of them, one spirit stood closer to the man than the others. A young woman, her face hidden behind dark hair. Yet somehow, I could feel her hatred more clearly than all the others combined. The young woman had been in a traffic accident years ago. According to the spirits, she was still alive when the ambulance arrived, barely breathing, but alive. Inside her bag, there was a small jewelry box, a pair of matching gold rings. She'd planned to propose that night, not to receive a ring, but to give one. She'd bought them with her own money, saved little by little, for the person she loved most. But before she could reach him, the accident happened. By the time the private ambulance arrived, her body was weak, her breathing was shallow, but she was not gone, not yet. The driver loaded her into the ambulance, and for a moment, there was still time, just enough time. If he'd driven straight to the hospital, she might have survived. But he didn't, because while she was lying there, barely conscious, he noticed her bag, then the jewelry box, then the rings. And instead of driving, he stopped. Not for long, only a few minutes. But inside an ambulance, a few minutes can become a lifetime. He opened the box, looked at the rings, and took them. One of the spirits told me the woman saw him do it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to know that the man who was supposed to save her was stealing from her instead. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, the woman was dead. But her anger never left that vehicle. The driver later melted down most of the jewelry he'd stolen over the years. Gold necklaces, bracelets, things taken from people who could no longer protect them. He turned them into thick gold rings for himself. That was why his fingers were covered in gold. 8 rings, 8 reminders. But one of them was different. The woman's ring. He never melted it, never sold it, never threw it away. Instead, he wore it on his own hand every single day. When I realized that, the young woman finally lifted her head. Her face was still hidden behind her wet hair, but I could see her mouth. She was smiling, not because she was happy, not because she had forgiven him, but because someone had finally understood. The driver suddenly began to panic. His breathing changed. His hands started shaking. And for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. He asked me if she was there, if the woman was standing near him. I didn't answer right away, because she wasn't just near him. She was right behind him, closer than he could imagine, close enough to see the ring on his finger, close enough to wait. For several seconds, the room remained completely silent. The man kept staring at his hands. His breathing became heavier, faster, almost desperate. Then suddenly, he grabbed one of the rings, the old one, the woman's ring, and he tried to pull it off. Nothing happened. He pulled harder, still nothing. The ring didn't move, not even slightly. The man began to panic. He twisted it, pulled it, scratched at it with his fingernails, but the ring remained exactly where it was, as though it had become part of his hand. His breathing turned into gasps. For the first time since entering the shrine, he looked terrified. Then he asked me a question he already knew the answer to. Is she here? I looked behind him. The woman hadn't moved. She was still standing there, watching, waiting. The man suddenly began shaking, because deep down, he already knew. He knew exactly whose ring he'd been wearing all these years, and he knew exactly why she had never left. The room felt colder than before. The candle flames trembled. The incense smoke drifted sideways. And for a moment, everything became perfectly still. Then I heard it, a sound, very small, very quiet. A woman's laughter. Not loud, not violent, just a soft laugh. The kind of laugh someone makes when they finally get what they've been waiting for. The man's face lost all color. His eyes widened, and tears began running down his cheeks. He kept staring at the ring, unable to look away. The strange thing was, the woman wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the ring, as though the ring itself mattered more than the man, as though it had become a promise, a reminder, evidence of something that should never have happened. The man left the shrine before sunrise. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask for help. He simply walked out into the rain and disappeared into the darkness. I never saw him again, but years later I still remember one thing, the look on the woman's face. Because it wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred, it wasn't revenge. It was patience, the kind of patience only the dead can afford. Years ago, an old shaman once told me something. Never take belongings from someone standing at the edge of death. Not because the item is cursed, not because spirits will immediately come for you, but because some objects become the final witness to a person's last moments. And sometimes, those moments refuse to be forgotten. Some people run from the dead. Some people hide from the dead. But eventually, everyone stops running. And the dead know that. Because the dead can wait.